When a person betrays you, you usually have a second person to whom you can go for support. But I found myself in a situation where two people close to me betrayed me. My wife, Lena, my wife of nearly 15 years, cheated on me. I met Lena back in school, on the Monday after I threw a party at my parents' farm while they were away. I had convinced a family friend who worked for us to get me a couple of bottles of sour mash. My cousin Terry got ridiculously drunk, which didn't take him long at that age. Instead of staying to sober up, he decided he needed to go home. I managed to take his truck keys away, but he thought he could outsmart me. The idiot slipped out the front door, determined to walk the 5 miles home, so I let him go. It turns out a young woman found him about a mile away, crawling through the ditches on her way to check the family mailbox because he couldn't stand anymore. That's how wasted he was when he left my parents' place. She got her father involved, who was a man of principle, and together they managed to get Terry back to his parents' house. My aunt, who's my dad's sister, had to clean up after him because he had thrown up multiple times thanks to his stupidity. My parents found out and I got grounded. They felt I had betrayed their trust and labeled me a complete fool. Nothing I said mattered because they believed the worst. To top it off, my aunt exaggerated the whole story, making it sound like the worst crime humanity had committed since the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. I was in deep trouble. I had supposedly corrupted her son, the choir boy who sang like an angel every Sunday at church. If only she knew the truth about how her son really behaved. There's nothing anyone can do when someone is blinded by their faith and can't see reality. So, I took the blame and dealt with the consequences. That experience taught me early on that the truth often doesn't matter. What matters is what people believe. From then on, I changed the way I dealt with everyone I knew. My father used to say I grew up too fast because I carried myself differently after that. One day, a girl I had never seen before approached me in the hallway before class. After lunch, she grabbed my attention, saying, "I hear you throw crazy parties at your parents' farm with half-dressed girls running around. Are you really so reckless that you let your friends leave when they're in no condition to even walk 10 feet? Who are you?" I asked, "And what on earth are you talking about?" "My name's Lena LeBlanc," she replied, "and I found one of your partygoers crawling through a ditch near my parents' place because he couldn't even stand up." I thought to myself, if only you knew how far from the truth that was, you'd realize how ridiculous you sound. But I didn't say that aloud because I knew that her believing those rumors could only boost my reputation with the popular crowd in our small town of Jackson. So I stayed quiet. "It's not as bad as you're making it out to be," I said as I checked her out. "But if you want to volunteer to be at the next Saturday afternoon bash, I'm open to it." Her face flushed red. She stammered, "Can't you tell I'm not that kind of girl?" "Maybe not," I replied. "But you want to be." "King, you're a jerk," she said, her face turning beet red. "Maybe," I said, "but jerks are meant to be dealt with harshly. Let me know when you're ready." She slapped me hard across the face and stormed off in a fit of pure rage. But I had caught the smirk on her face just before her hand connected. I stood there laughing. My reputation for the year was officially sealed, thanks to her loud mouth. I ended up being one of the most popular kids at school that year. "She has no idea, does she?" asked my cousin Terry, who had seen everything. "Not a clue," I replied. "What the hell did you even tell her?" "How should I know, you idiot?" he shot back. "You're the one dumb enough to play poker for shots after we smoked a joint." I started laughing because Terry didn't realize I had rigged the deck. With that, we headed off to our first class. From that moment on, the game started between Lena and me. I took every opportunity to tease her, going as far as I could whenever I saw her in public. I tried to make it obvious to everyone around me that I was mentally in bed with her. It became so obvious that one of her friends started playing Hungry Eyes on her phone whenever she noticed me doing it. For me, it was a way to get back at Lena LeBlanc for slapping me, of course. I was acting like a jerk, but I was having fun besides. Her body was undoubtedly attractive. If any of her friends had asked me about it, I would have said bluntly, "I'm interested in her." But Lena told me that we would only have a relationship when hell freezes over. So until then, I will respect her wishes. That only added to Lena's frustration because they would want to know what I had done to cause it. When she explained the whole situation to them, the usual response was either laughter at what had happened or teasing her because of how she reacted to me. Lena LeBlanc was stunning. She came from the deep south, and after a hurricane devastated her home, her family relocated to the middle of flyover country. She was a fiery Cajun redhead with a body that filled my dreams at night. She stood about 5 feet 6 inches, a compact, curvy figure in all the right places. If you got her mad outside of school, she could unleash a torrent of Cajun French swearing like nobody's business. I'll admit I enjoyed watching her get frustrated when her friends clued her in on what I was up to. The grin that spread across my face when I saw her blush at the remarks about our situation made it clear that I was definitely amused by it. I completed the moment when she put on a low-cut blouse. When people heard this in the hallways, they immediately realized that Lena was wearing something that made her especially attractive. For the rest of the day, every guy tried to keep his eyes on her. I'm not sure if she liked the attention, but I found it quite funny. I often found myself staring at her petite, alluring figure. She had the indomitable spirit of a wild horse that was difficult to tame, if at all possible. Her behavior could change from passive to aggressive or dominant, depending on her mood. A man who managed to win her over would need Job's patience, because it would take a long time to just understand her before even coming up with a plan to get closer to her. The more I watched her, the more I realized how complicated she really was. That's how much I was captivated by her. If there was a woman who could seriously upset me, it was her. Sometimes she would catch my gaze when no one else was noticing and would do something to tease me. We both played the game, deliberately provoking each other, and it took us almost the entire school year to realize how much it affected us. Everyone knew that I liked girls with great figures, and in my opinion, Lena had no equal. Apparently, her mother had told her that men who are attracted to a female figure become the most faithful husbands in the long run. Lena let it slip to Karen, and it soon became a popular opinion throughout the school. We were both going to graduate from the 12th grade with honors. She gave a farewell speech and I took second place. She believed that if anyone found out what I was doing outside of school, I would not be taken into account at all. We had just finished rehearsing our roles at the graduation ceremony, which was to take place in a month on the auditorium stage. I was an understudy in case she got sick, but I knew she would come even out of spite. There was no way she would let me win by default. We both received substantial educational grants. Our senior prom was coming up this Saturday in the fall. I planned to enroll at Southeastern Missouri University to earn a master's degree in agricultural sciences. As we left the stage and went down the back stairs to the hallway, I whispered in her ear, "Will you let me try this?" She turned around, slapped me in the face and said, "When hell freezes over." When I had nothing more to lose and there was no one around to see it, despair took hold of me. I became a little persistent, pulling her to me and lowering my head to meet her gaze. She resisted at first, but my determination won out. It was my only chance to go all in, and I wasn't going to miss it. Her eyes widened as I brought my lips close to hers, giving her a kiss. If this was going to be our first and last kiss, I wanted it to be unforgettable. After I finally got what I'd been wanting for so long, I let her go in a way to express my feelings for her. Her blue eyes reflected a mixture of passion, disappointment, and anger, so I expected a serious reaction. However, her reaction took me by surprise. She pushed me hard against the wall and clung to me tightly, reflecting my previous aggression. Lena had demonstrated that she could stand up for herself as an equal if necessary. She was a tough nut to crack. "I've been waiting for most of the school year, Jet," King Lena said, "so that you stop talking and start acting. I'm glad you finally decided to step in." "I'm glad to hear that," I replied. "It's a pity that you didn't tell me about this a few months ago. Now, please, could you loosen your grip? Not until you agree that everything is fine with us, until we decide to break up," Lena said firmly. "Agreed. You're the only one I've been interested in since you slapped me," I said. I smiled and bent down to kiss her again. It felt like I was holding a piece of paradise. After a few minutes, we finally came down the stairs after hearing a noise, still holding hands. We both knew that our relationship had taken a significant step forward. If we had been anywhere else besides school, I sincerely believe that at that moment we were so strongly attracted to each other that we would not have been able to stop the mutual attraction that grew during the school year, sharpened our feelings to the limit. Those who saw us coming out realized that something had happened. Later, we discovered that, for the rest of the day, we were the only people talking about us in the corridors. It was funny because none of us really dated that year. It seemed like we were both waiting for each other. At the end of the day, I was waiting for her in front of the school to catch the bus when she noticed me walking with her best friend. The joy in her eyes was real bliss. Without uttering a word, she handed me the school books she was bringing home and asked, "Can we stop by Dairy Queen for a milkshake before you take me home?" Flat Karen gasped, "You and Jet, when did you two finally acknowledge your feelings for each other?" If you'd ever seen Flat Karen, you'd understand why the boys called her a carpenter's dream. She was as straight as a board and had never been nailed. Sometimes we joked that she was a pirate's treasure because she had a sunken chest. "I'll call you later tonight to explain everything," Lena said as we walked out hand in hand toward my Jeep Cherokee Sport. We stopped at the Dairy Queen, just past the police station on the main road through town. She wanted a Blizzard while I opted for a regular shake, so I ordered both in the largest sizes available. We went to the city park, found a picnic table, and started getting to know each other. By the time I dropped her off at her parents' house, it was around 6 p.m. Her mother saw me get out of the car and opened the door for her. Her father joined her and gave me a scrutinizing look as I approached to ask for his permission to take his daughter to the dance on Saturday night. I think my request surprised him because he seemed uncertain about how to react. Lena later mentioned that he was taken aback by someone our age being so respectful. Eventually, he gave his approval and extended his hand for a handshake. I discovered much later that for him, my show of respect spoke volumes about my upbringing. Years later, when I asked for his daughter's hand in marriage, he didn't have any significant objections, as long as I agreed to his plans to safeguard his assets. After Lena had gone inside her parents' home, I hopped into my truck and drove to my own family's farm. I couldn't believe I had finally kissed the girl of my dreams. My parents immediately noticed that something in my life had changed. It was unusual for me to be this late after school. So naturally, my mom asked why I was delayed. I simply replied that I had been engaged in an interesting conversation. Later, my dad, with a smile, asked me privately, "Who is she, and what's her name?" I explained, "I'm taking a redhead to the school dance on Saturday night. I asked her out tonight, which is why I was so late." From that day on, Lena and I were inseparable. It was Saturday, the day my parents headed into town. I was up in the hay loft, getting ready to relocate some straw bales after cleaning out 4 stalls with the help of the tractor's front loader. I usually did this once a month, typically on the first Saturday. The horses were confined in the pasture. I had moved everything necessary to the edge of the loft and had just lowered 2 bales to spread out on the stall floors when I heard Lena calling for me. "I'm up here," I replied. "I have 14 more bales to throw down before I can come down." I began tossing them over the side as quickly as possible and was almost ready to descend when I saw Lena's head emerging above the floor. I walked over to greet her as she finished climbing up. It's funny how much flat space was available within the straw bales. Sometime later, we found ourselves entwined in bales of straw. Lena and I probably would have continued if we hadn't heard my parents honking in the car. I realized that they were trying to get my attention by the time we got down the stairs. They were already approaching the barn. Lena and I quickly started spreading straw in the stalls. My mom and dad caught us in one of the stalls, laughing and playfully throwing straws at each other. My parents had ventured out to the barn out of curiosity, noticing an unfamiliar vehicle in the yard while I was absent. They were delighted to discover that the farm visitor was a pleasant-looking girl about my age. I found it amusing to see the surprise on my parents' faces when I introduced Lena to them as my girlfriend. I mentioned that once I finished laying the floor bedding, I planned to saddle up the horses and take her for a ride. My mom suggested, "Before you do that, let's have lunch." Lena offered to help her, so they headed back to the house together. "Good call, Jet," my dad remarked. I can't confirm anything else was happening. Lena is in her prime just like your mother was at your age. Don't mess up this new relationship because she seems like a great match. If you're thinking about getting serious, make sure she's someone worthy of being the mother of your children. My father was a straightforward man who always spoke his mind. He had a knack for emphasizing important ideas, such as the fact that our actions inevitably lead to consequences. I found out that my dad had always been fond of redheads. He helped me complete preparing the 4 stalls for the horses before we went inside. By the time we returned home, my mother and Lena were already on their way to becoming friends. After lunch, we went horseback riding and reached the back 50, with the horses tied to a low branch. We both ended up with some new grass stains as we leaned against the tree by the swimming pond, continuing our conversation from earlier that day. It was around 5 in the afternoon when she left to get ready for the school dance. That evening, at the dance, my cousin Terry heard Lena telling Karen that she was attracted to my sweet and gentle nature. Although Lena and I had teased and provoked each other, we had never acted on those feelings. I admire someone who can manage their temper, and Jet has consistently demonstrated that. She told Karen and my cousin Terry, "From what I've observed, Jet can be forceful when necessary." Lena explained, "His naturally calm demeanor influences everything he does, but once he decides on something, there's no convincing him to back down." She showed this by patiently waiting for me, as if the decision was mine. His cousin Terry mentioned that when Jet speaks with authority, most people perceive it as anger. Karen said that's because he naturally has a loud, strong voice, so for years he's worked on toning it down. "I would do anything for Jet," Terry added, "just as he would for me. If you make him angry, you'll quickly realize you've underestimated him. There are more than a few boys here who have crossed him and ended up lying injured on the ground after he handled them. When I picked her up for the last prom of the school year, her parents were surprised when I brought her a bouquet. It wasn't some special event, they noted, but it was the most beautiful bouquet they had ever seen. I explained that I made it from plants grown in a small nursery that my dad and I opened on the farm. I used neutral colors to make it fit any interior, and it seemed to make a big impression on them. God, she looked so attractive in that tight white summer dress, a dress that accentuated her figure so vividly during each slow dance. I experienced everything possible more than once. I had to go into the bathroom to clean myself up. It was obvious to everyone who watched her that we were a couple now. She was a real teaser to me, and she knew it. I guess she was deliberately upsetting me that night to get back at me for everything we'd done to each other over the school year. By summer's end, spending time in the hay loft had become a frequent activity for us. My mother and I had an extended conversation after she discovered my collection of condoms concealed in the back of a drawer. It was then that she decided to have a serious discussion with the woman she hoped would become her future daughter-in-law. In hindsight, I should have understood the implications of that conversation because not long after, Lena told me she was using birth control pills. One evening during dinner, my mother contributed her thoughts by saying, "The horses seem to prefer the stalls much more these days and have been much livelier in the pasture. I wonder if it's because the straw has acquired a new scent." I nearly choked on my food and started coughing. My dad looked up and asked, "Did I miss something?" Early in my childhood, my father recognized my passion for horticulture and encouraged me to nurture it. Thanks to his guidance, we transformed 20 acres of our 250-acre farm into a Christmas tree plantation. By obtaining a reforestation grant and researching the best tree species for the Christmas market, we were able to acquire young trees at a low cost. Every spring break, my father and I spent the entire week planting numerous rows of new seedlings. This time together was a special bonding experience for us. About 2 weeks before planting, we prepared the land by tilling the soil. Depending on the weather, we would till the area 3 or 4 times before leveling it, which made the planting process quick and efficient. As a result, we were able to start marketing our first harvest for sale in the following season. We had around 400 trees, each approximately 8 foot tall. The only remaining task was to trim them to ensure they were perfect for retail customers. We even developed a branding system so consumers could identify which farm the trees originated from. When I was in 6th grade, My father noticed my deep interest in growing plants and realized that expanding our operations would require replenishing the topsoil. To address this, the town of Jackson and my father negotiated an agreement for the town to deliver all the yard waste they collected to a designated area on our farm for large-scale topsoil production. Not long after, our neighboring city of Cape Girardeau adopted the same arrangement. They found it convenient and cost-effective, making it an obvious choice for them. From an early age, at least twice a month, I would dedicate a full day or two to grinding down branches, twigs, and other materials to create mulch. We would then sift the processed mulch through large screens to separate out non-biodegradable items, which needed to be incinerated in oil drums. The ashes from these materials were scattered along the property lines to ensure the final product remained as pure as possible. When a compost pile reached a certain size, we would add chemicals to accelerate the decomposition process and maintain high moisture levels. Once or twice a month, we would turn the pile to incorporate air, keeping it loose and promoting further rotting. Local building contractors soon realized they could dispose of clean excess soil with us without any dumping fees, most of which was a type of Missouri red clay. By using bulk chemicals designed to speed up decomposition, we mixed this soil with the biodegradable mulch we produced. Over time, this aspect of our expanding business covered several acres. The key was maintaining well-aerated and damp soil. We hadn't anticipated that some of the donated soil would be used to help level and flatten the land where we constructed our greenhouses. After removing a portion of the topsoil, transforming what was essentially worthless dirt, suitable only for brick making, into high-quality topsoil took us 18 months. We utilized it as bedding for new plants in our greenhouses and also sold some directly to the retail market in 10-pound bags. Within the first 3 years, we earned enough profit to build 2 large, elongated glass greenhouses, which we heated during the winter with natural gas furnaces. Both greenhouses were filled with flowering plants, ready for shipment to local wholesalers as needed. By employing numerous PCP pipes and a custom-designed expandable hose system, we developed an automatic irrigation system that suspended from above. We applied the same techniques when watering our crops. Excess water was collected through a drainage system that my father had installed in the concrete floor and was reused. This method ensured that any fertilizer lost from daily watering was retained and recycled, with an additional 50% of new water added. We found this approach to be highly effective in reducing costs, and it eliminated the need for a collection pond due to the excess fertilizer in the water. Over the summer, we plan to add 4 more greenhouses dedicated to cultivating white and red poinsettias for the Christmas season, increasing our total to 10. My father believed that the additional income from our joint efforts would allow me to graduate from university without any debt. I vividly remember the first time Lena visited our operation. It gave her insight into why I had chosen this career path. My dad explained to her that my curious nature was instrumental in bringing this business to life. Jet was always asking questions, my dad said, which made me think. After discussing it with my wife and getting her approval, the family decided to proceed. It has now become our main source of income and continues to grow steadily. What was the farm used for before all this? Lena asked. Raising cattle, my dad replied. As you probably know, the market can be quite volatile, and profits can vary significantly based on wholesale prices. By the time I graduated from college, we operated 22 spacious greenhouses, each measuring 240 feet in length, 40 feet in width, and 9 feet in height. We were consistently shipping high-quality organic produce on a weekly basis, due to increasing customer demand. We began expanding once more out of our greenhouses. 2 were dedicated to growing leaf lettuce for a supermarket chain, another 2 cultivated bok choy, and 2 produced English cucumbers. Our team consisted of 20 employees and was still expanding. All our products were grown without chemicals, marketed as organic, and fetched higher prices from wholesalers as a result. Our financial situation was thriving, as anticipated. I became fully involved in the family business. Lena had become a family nurse practitioner and joined a group affiliated with Southeast Missouri Hospital just a week after she received her license. I proposed to her 3 months later. We hurriedly got married because she was expecting our daughter. A year after that, we welcomed our 2 sons, born a year apart from the day we married. Lena was showered with affection by both of my parents, who treated her as if she were the center of their world. My mother was ecstatic to become a grandmother and took on the role of our babysitter. Our children gave her a newfound and significant purpose in her life. To this day, our children embody the morals and values that she helped instill in them. We had just marked our 14th wedding anniversary when my cousin Terry and his wife Karen pulled me aside during a family barbecue. They couldn't help but observe that Lena seemed to dominate our relationship, making me appear overly passive and relaxed. It appeared that many of our mutual friends were worried about the future of our marriage. Karen remarked, "Sometimes Lena's behavior towards you just makes it seem like she's treating you as a second-class partner and keeping you around until she finds what she truly wants." Terry added bluntly, "To be straightforward, cousin, Lena might claim she still loves you, but we all feel she has lost respect for you as a man. She behaves like a mother who is fed up with just being a mother, even towards you." I attempted to defend her, as any husband would when faced with such accusations, but Terry and Karen dismissed my efforts. Karen continued, "Yet Lena is always criticizing the things you don't do. It's as if she's blowing every minor issue out of proportion. You avoid arguments and fights, and you've softened your tone so much that she barely hears you. You see her complaints and feel resentful because it seems like she's nagging, which has led you to stop listening to her entirely." Terry stated, "Your marriage lacks equality because Lena takes the lead and you just go along. Lena is leveraging your gentle nature and personality to assert more control over you, without your awareness. You've simply been too blind to notice." He continued, "Both of you, in your own ways, are pushing each other away. You work long hours because you don't want to come home, but won't admit it. Lena is finding reasons to do the same. Some of our mutual friends suspect she has developed a romantic interest outside the marriage." Later, I was occupied working on the flat grill in preparation for dinner when Lena requested me to fetch something. I had been seriously considering the things Terry and Karen had mentioned, reflecting on my marriage with Lena. I finally realized that in many aspects they were correct. After clearly hearing my cousin and his wife, I responded, "Can't you see? I'm busy. Why don't you handle it yourself, or have one of our kids do it? For too long, you've treated me like a servant. Honestly, I'm tired of being your doormat." The shock on my wife's face spoke volumes. Lena had finally heard the voice she thought I no longer had. Everyone nearby fell silent because I appeared angry. Lena turned and went inside to get it herself, feeling outmaneuvered for the first time in a long while. "Dad, what's going on with you?" my 13-year-old daughter Luna asked. "I have reached a point where I can no longer tolerate feeling like a servant to your mother," I replied, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Unless your mother changes how she views me, we're going to face some tough months at home." Everyone present had just experienced a wake-up call. I realized that throughout most of our marriage, I had kept my composure because I didn't think it was worth the conflict. By avoiding confrontation, I made it easy for my wife to walk all over me, treating me like a doormat. That evening, Lena and I had a significant disagreement. I openly acknowledged that it was long overdue. As a consequence, I ended up sleeping on the couch that night. Near the end of our argument, Lena remarked, "You just don't realize how redundant you are." That's when I lost control. We had been arguing outside, so the children didn't hear us. In a fit of pure anger, I grabbed Lena, placed her over my knee, and spanked her, just as I would discipline our children for misbehaving. She retreated to the bedroom in tears, her backside noticeably red, and locked the door to keep me out. Describing Lena as tiptoeing around me the next morning would be an understatement. She had been jolted into a new reality. The following morning, after the wife and kids had left the house, I returned from the large office adjacent to the greenhouses to see what I could discover while lying on the couch. Trying to pinpoint when our marriage had started to deteriorate, it dawned on me that it had begun 8 years ago, merely a few months after my mother passed away. After thoroughly searching her side of the bedroom, I discovered a wristband adorned with numerous small charms. The issue was that it was entirely custom-made from 18-karat gold, and I hadn't purchased it for her. The charms were so alluringly intimate that she could never have worn them publicly. I was certain they had been specially crafted for her at her lover's request, given their high cost. Quietly, I slipped them into my pocket to take along, intending to have them appraised. This supported Karen and Terry's suspicions. Returning to my office, I kept to myself when questioned about it. When asked, I simply admitted that I had a lot on my mind, which was the honest truth. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when a staff member entered my office, I asked her to contact the group my wife was associated with to determine if they were accepting new clients. I'd be happy to do that, but may I ask why? Fiona inquired. For personal reasons. I need to confirm my wife's actual work schedule, I replied. I've heard some rumors that I need to disprove, so someone finally mustered the courage to tell you what we've been hearing for months. Fiona responded as she left the room. Fiona, Karen's sister, was a military widow who had joined our company while her husband was still serving. Now she was raising her daughter on her own. I often wondered why she hadn't found another man. Fiona was the complete opposite of her sister. She was strikingly attractive. Throughout our marriage, my wife was the only woman who had ever caught my attention. But observing Fiona's feminine appeal made me realize I was still young enough to start anew. The realization that I had other options brought a sense of calm to my mind. Although I had known Fiona for years through Terry and Karen, I hadn't paid much attention to her. For some reason, I felt the thrill of the unknown once more, and it was an enlightening experience for me. When she returned the information she had given me, it was quite insightful. Her working hours didn't match what I had been told. Instead of working Thursday and Friday nights until 10 p.m. each week, she only did so once a month, just like the other doctors in their office. Fiona and I talked for several minutes. She attempted to ask questions without making it obvious that she was probing. I'm not sure if she realized it, but she introduced some ideas that gave me hope about my future. This left her with a lot of unaccounted time. I was shocked to discover that she only worked half a day on Wednesdays. The pressing question now was how she was spending all that free time. 8 years ago, when cancer took my mother, both my father and I were surprised to learn that she had left her shares in the family business to me, in trust for her 3 grandchildren. When I was young, they had sold most of the farm to the corporation at an inflated price, keeping 10 acres around the house in their name and allocating 10 acres in mine. The corporation paid off the mortgage over 10 years with interest, and they presented the land to me as a wedding gift from Lena and me. Lena and I used that land to build our home. Dad was deeply affected by losing his wife and withdrew for a few months afterward. During that time, I became the president of the company, and Dad semi-retired, becoming our first CEO. He still came in 3 mornings a week to stay involved and acted as an advisor. I was aware of an important business trip approaching in a few weeks that would take me to 8 different corporate offices to renew contracts requiring my signature. These were all long-term agreements with predetermined product pricing, allowing us flexibility for cost increases. Since the trip spanned 3 countries, I would be away for at least 3 weeks. Both my father and I continued to lead our company, which now employed over 100 people. We had expanded to more than 48 greenhouses, all operating at full capacity. Fortunately, during my first full-time year, I had the property inspected for potential underground water sources. We discovered one that would meet our needs for years, and by disconnecting from the county water supply at that time, we reduced our monthly expenses by $10,000. Additionally, we uncovered a significant natural gas reservoir on the land, which had been in our family for generations. We still owned the mineral rights, and after negotiating with major companies, we received a substantial payout, even after covering the costs for the heat we used. We received a generous royalty check each month. My cousin Terry, our chief financial officer, visited my office to update me on our latest cash flow statement, which indicated we were on track for our highest growth year ever. During this private meeting, I shared my recent discovery with him. He was as astonished as I was upon reviewing the details. "It looks like the man she's seeing is very wealthy," I said. "What are your plans, Jet? Are you going to have someone else sign the contracts?" Terry inquired. "No, I'll go in acting clueless about the situation," I replied. "This will give the private investigators I plan to hire ample time to uncover who my wife's lover is. That won't hold up in divorce court since it's a 50-50 state," Terry responded. Lena's father, Leonard LeBlanc, Was and still is a deceitful bastard, I said. Before Lena and I married, he forced us to negotiate a prenuptial agreement. I think Lena has completely forgotten about it. Why did he do that? Terry asked. Is he wealthy from fracking, to ensure he could protect his daughter so I would never inherit any of her assets? I explained. If we divorce due to adultery, the guilty party only walks away with their clothes, and that's about it. When I arrived home that evening, I noticed a clear shift in my wife's behavior. She appeared to have developed a respect for me that I hadn't seen in years. It seemed we both recognized that our relationship had undergone a significant transformation. Lena was undoubtedly trying to understand what I thought I already knew. Interestingly, that same morning, my father had decided to go on a 2-day fishing trip with some of his childhood friends. They had been encouraging him to take this trip for years, but he had always found an excuse. He would remain away until the day before my return. While he was away, Lena spent much more time at home. This behavior seemed suspicious and gave me the impression that something was happening in his life that he wanted to keep from me. A few days later, my daughter called to tell me that her mother was frantically searching for something that was lost and had questioned all 3 of my children about it. Dad, Mom accused all of us of going into your bedroom and searching through her dresser drawers, Luna explained. Whatever she can't find must be really important to her because I thought she was about to cry when I returned home that evening. I questioned Lena about the situation, and she dismissed it as insignificant. However, when I mentioned what our daughter had confided in me, Lena suggested that our daughter might have misunderstood and assured me she would address it with her after dinner. During dinner, I gave her a look reminiscent of when I used to tease her back in high school. Her attitude shifted dramatically, and she became very quiet. I suspected that Lena now thought I knew about her affair. After dinner, as she was putting the boys to bed, our daughter approached me to ask what was happening. Luna, I'm not entirely sure, I replied. I've been told something, and if it's true, things are going to become much more challenging for a while as your parents navigate through it. Just remember, this situation isn't because of anything you or your brothers did. Weeks had elapsed since I discovered the bracelet adorned with numerous charms. Each of the 16 charms was valued at $88,000, and the combination of platinum and gold in the bracelet's chain added an additional $20,000 to its worth. The person who had given it to her had commissioned it from one of the most prestigious goldsmiths in the jewelry industry. Since each charm was unique, they were likely purchased to commemorate significant moments or events in their relationship. If she received about 2 charms each year, perhaps for birthdays and anniversaries, it indicated a span of roughly 8 years. I was hesitant to accept the implications, but the circumstantial evidence was leading me toward a direction I dreaded. As a result, I rearranged my schedule to include a necessary stop to obtain the information I needed. I booked a hotel room in St. Louis to receive the complete report from the private investigators before continuing with the rest of my business trip. It was there that my worst fears were confirmed. My wife's lover over the past nearly 8 years was someone I had known my entire life, my father. The private investigators provided me with both a written copy and a digital file of their findings. After the investigators left, fully compensated, I read through the entire printed report. It was so detailed that I almost felt sick. Thankfully, I had bought a couple of bottles of scotch from the duty-free store on my way back from Canada, and I downed more than a few strong shots while going through it. Summoning my courage, I reached out to Leonard LeBlanc, my soon-to-be ex-father-in-law, and requested his personal email address. Leonard was a proud man who lived by his own set of values, and I dreaded the personal impact this report would have on him. However, I knew that if I didn't reveal the truth, he would aid in undermining me during our divorce. Why on earth should I do that? Leonard responded. Because I want you to be prepared for what's coming, I explained. You wouldn't believe it if you heard it from me. I just received a file about 2 hours ago, and it cost me $6,000 to obtain. After obtaining the file, I emailed it to him from my laptop and awaited the impending phone call. When you first meet Leonard LeBlanc, he might come across as the living embodiment of Gomer Pyle. Standing well over 6 feet tall, he was incredibly clumsy and awkward. He was the son of an alligator hunter whose father had been fortunate enough to strike it rich with his old-fashioned behavior and simple language. He seemed like a bumbling fool. Many had been thoroughly outmaneuvered because they underestimated the hidden brilliance he possessed. When Leonard took an interest in something, he delved into it thoroughly from the ground up. Numerous CEOs were astonished when tough deals were finalized just 6 months into his tenure. When he took over a corporation, he already had strategies in place to enhance its profitability and productivity by exploiting their weaknesses. He could reduce their initial costs by millions. The instant my phone rang, I picked up as I had anticipated. It was my father-in-law on the line. "Jesus damn it, Jet!" Leonard exclaimed. "You were right. If you had told me, I would have called you the biggest liar in the country. How much worse is this going to get?" "I'm going to handle them just as you would," I responded. "There will be no mercy for the two of them. Don't hold it against you at all, son." He said, "I'd punish anyone for what they've done. Just promise me you won't take any action until we have a face-to-face conversation where our discussion can't be recorded." Leonard LeBlanc was a man of strong religious beliefs, who had never stepped foot in a church his entire life. He had his own sense of right and wrong, whether you agreed with him or not. You had to respect him for living by his principles throughout his life. Securing his support meant everything. "Everything, Dad. How about we take the boys fishing on the first Sunday after I get back?" I suggested. "You could call your daughter tonight and make the arrangements if she's available." He laughed and replied, "I like that idea. It'll kill 2 birds with 1 stone. One thing I needed to know was what made me suspicious. I found a bracelet with several charms on it, had it appraised, and discovered it was custom-made." I explained, "Last Monday, while I was in Montreal, I arranged for it to be sent to my wife from Paris, France. It will be delivered by courier, 1 piece at a time, to her workplace, with a note saying that I'll contact you and your mistress at the right time, so you can understand the price of my silence. She should have all 16 pieces back in her possession before I return home." "Jesus Christ, Jet. She's going to become a complete mess, and so will he," Lena's father remarked. "So why? It gives me time to find a buyer for my shares in the corporation, because I'm going to sell my father's dream," I responded. "Because that's the only thing that will hurt him as much as he hurt me. It will keep them psychologically unsteady for a little while longer," I continued. "Their fears will become more pronounced as the date of my return approaches." "How much longer are you on this trip?" Leonard asked. "I have just over 2 weeks left of living out of a suitcase," I said. "From the moment the first couriered letter catches my eye, they're like the walking dead." "It would be easier if they were simply dead," Leonard replied, taken out as if it were an accident. After he hung up, I felt at ease knowing that Leonard LeBlanc would wait for no one. Being a man from the swamps, he knew how to handle things in a way that left no questions unanswered. I was nestled in the center of New York, staying at a Trump hotel and savoring a delightful dinner at one of its many excellent restaurants with some of the business associates I was working with. Fortunately, I was set to return home on Friday. While I was still seated, detectives approached me with some distressing information. It was well past 9 in the evening. "My father has passed away," they said. I was stunned and had to inquire about the details. Apparently, my wife and he had decided to take a swim in the backyard pool, a spot Lena and I frequented during the early days of our relationship. They had gone for a leisurely horseback ride that Wednesday afternoon, while the children were at school, and chose to cool off afterward due to the sweltering heat. My father had entered the water before Lena. Local authorities suspected that a pet alligator had been released into the pool a few years prior, and it had since adapted to its environment. Divers recovered my father's unclothed body after eliminating the alligator. The 3 of us understood the implications of these events. My wife, Lena, was physically unharmed, but was experiencing significant emotional distress. Witnessing her father-in-law being killed right in front of her had deeply traumatized her. Our children were staying with their grandparents until Lena could regain her composure. I went back to my table and informed the remaining diners about the tragic news before excusing myself to handle some personal matters. As I walked back to my suite, I couldn't shake the thought that I would never want to find myself at odds with Leonard LeBlanc. I pondered what he might have in store for his daughter after pouring myself a strong drink. I decided to make a phone call. Leonard picked up immediately. "How are the kids?" was my first question. "They're doing okay, I guess," Dad replied, using some slang. "They're upset, but not more than what's typical for children their age." "Are they still awake? Can I speak with them?" I inquired. I spent the next hour talking to all three of my children before they returned their grandfather's cell phone to him. "Based on what Lena has explained to me," Leonard said, "your father drowned because an alligator dragged him underwater during its feeding. They discovered his unclothed body along with some dead animals in his refrigerator. Although he wasn't bitten, he does have a few scratches, so I recommend a closed casket." "Thanks, Dad," I responded earnestly. "I'll be home first thing Saturday morning to begin making the funeral arrangements. I'll let you go now because I should call my wife and check how she's handling everything." "That sounds like a good plan," he replied. "It's important to maintain appearances during times like these," he said before saying goodbye. I reached out to Lena, and as expected, she was extremely distressed. It was difficult to have a conversation with her since she couldn't stop crying. She was baffled about how they hadn't noticed the alligator earlier, especially since they went horse riding every Wednesday. I asked if it was usual for the two of them to swim NACD together. Lena became emotionally overwhelmed and ended the call. She now realized that I knew the truth. The next morning, while I was in the middle of a business meeting, the same two detectives I had met the previous night called me in. It turns out that after my wife had passed out drunk while trying to drown her sorrows, there was a gas explosion that destroyed part of the house. She didn't survive and was crushed to death by the debris. I went inside and requested if we could expedite the process because I needed to depart as soon as possible. Fortunately, they understood, and I ended up securing a better deal than I had anticipated. I was lucky to catch the last flight to Cape that night. As I disembarked from the 12-seater plane, I saw my father-in-law waiting for me. "The wife and I expect you and the grandkids to stay with us until everything is sorted out," Dad said. "This should give you time to organize and settle things." "How is Mom handling everything?" I inquired. "It was difficult for her until the police informed us this afternoon that she had been your father's long-term lover," Dad replied. "They confirmed their suspicions by discovering the blackmail notes Lena had been receiving in your father's study." "That's intriguing," I responded. "It must have been unsettling for them." What shocked them was finding the bracelet with 16 different charms, all in a state of disarray, Dad added. "It could indicate a pattern of what the lovers did back then. Of course, they plan to talk to you once the funeral is over." "How do you suggest I handle my meeting with them?" I asked. "Be straightforward. Bring your prenuptial agreement and the private investigator's report with you. Give them these documents immediately. It will show that you had no motive to set them up." I smiled because I knew he mentioned that to remind me that all deaths, until proven otherwise, are treated as suspicious. The more transparent I was about them, the less likely they would classify it as a homicide. Dad and I went together to the funeral director's office to select the coffins. We decided on closed caskets for both of them. Afterwards, I contacted Terry at the office to inform him that the contracts were signed and that I would be taking a few days off. The funeral and memorial tea for the two were well attended. I believed my children handled everything admirably, given the circumstances. I kept my emotions in check as much as possible, though there were moments when I showed my feelings. Most people believed that the two had a closer relationship than usual, but nothing was publicly discussed. The detectives patiently waited for the fire inspectors to complete their final report on the cause of the gas explosion at my home. The inspectors determined that a faulty installation carried out during my absence was responsible. I was advised that with this report, I could legally pursue a lawsuit against the gas company for wrongful death and the loss of my home. They were unable to determine when the alligator was introduced to the pond. I presented them with my prenuptial agreement and the private investigator's report. Using my father-in-law's printer, I provided them with a copy to keep. They expressed their gratitude for sharing this information, as it clarified any remaining uncertainties that might have arisen when others examined their final report and conclusions on the case. Lena's father and I were relaxing on the back patio with a couple of cold beers, going over my interview with the detectives, when he said, "Your wife and I are updating our wills to place everything into a living trust for the children, which you will manage until they turn 30. Do you want to know if I had any involvement in what happened?" "Dad, it doesn't matter," I responded. "Karma dealt them, they're just desserts. Let's just leave it at that." Leonard smiled and added, "I always knew you were a clever man who knew exactly what to say when it mattered." My children and I were overwhelmed by a major shopping spree at Macy's when Fiona unexpectedly bumped into us. We had moved into my father's house while ours was being rebuilt, a much-needed and overdue change. Fiona kindly offered to lend a hand. "Fiona, we're buying things because we have nothing left," I explained. "Let me introduce you to my 3 children, Luna, Leon, and Levi." We decided to start with the boys. After learning their preferences, we began shopping. We bought enough underwear for 2 weeks, followed by t-shirts, blue jeans, shirts, jackets, and other clothing items. As soon as possible, I paid for our selections and carried them to the car. By the end of the process, I had made 6 trips to the car and was completely exhausted. The final trip was for new shoes. "Dad, why doesn't Fiona come with us to our temporary home?" the kids asked. "Then she can help you pick out your new wardrobe." "I don't want your father to think I'm intruding," Fiona replied. "It's not really my place." "Dad," Luna asserted firmly, "I think you should let her come along and then take her out to dinner to show how much we appreciate her help." So that's exactly what we did. After dropping off the kids and unloading all the purchases, we returned, and Fiona assisted me further. In total, it took us 4 hours. So I invited Fiona to dinner, and she accepted. I called Luna to get her approval before arranging their favorite pizza to be delivered via cell phone. When I got home, I was faced with a big question. "Dad, are you going to ask her out on a real date?" And that was the question still awaiting an answer.